first thing I want to do before I cut my strips is iron the fabric, just get all the big creases and wrinkles out of it. I have the selvage ends together, and there's already this natural fold in here from when I got the fabric, and so I'm gonna leave it in because it's easier for me to cut strips when the fabric is folded in half like this. But I'm gonna be careful when I iron not to go over this folded side and crease it further. I'm going to, once I cut the strips, I'll iron that crease out of it. But I'm gonna go ahead and mist my fabric. I just use tap water here, and again I'm being careful not to iron the fold in there, but I'm just trying to get those bigger wrinkles out of this fabric and bigger creases. And I will flip it over and do the other side as well. You may have seen in some previous videos that I like to save the selvage edges that have little sayings that I like. So this one says, "Magic is all around, you just have to believe." I think that's a cute one. So maybe I'll use that as the trim on the label that I put on this quilt, which I made a video for how I trim with these. So I just want to make sure when I cut off the selvage edge, I also take a little bit of the fabric too, so I can see the match in there. So maybe like a half an inch, maybe a little less of the print I want to make sure stays above the selvage. I'll still have plenty to have enough strips even if I take a little bit of that end piece off there. All right, so I'm just gonna start by trimming off my selvage edges, and that'll save me a step from having to do it later, but I want to preserve the saying that I was showing you. So I'm going to measure a half inch from the selvage edge where the selvage and the fabric meet, and I'm just going to trim down here. That'll get it on both sides, and make sure you just smooth out the fabric before you trim it. Alright, I'm gonna start off by just cleaning up the edge here to make sure I have a nice straight cut. So I'm gonna align the fold to a horizontal line on my ruler up here, which I know you can't see, but it's aligned to a horizontal line, and I'm gonna use this mark at 26 top and bottom here to make sure that I have a straight line and that it'll cut off both sides, so I don't find out that what's underneath comes up short. And then once I do that, because I'm right-handed, I'm gonna give it a spin. Try not to unfold it. And then just gonna align it to a vertical line over here just to make sure it stays straight. And I'm just gonna start cutting my 6 2.5 inch strips. So I'm just lining up the 2.5 inch mark on my ruler, making sure it's on the 2.5 inch mark all the way up and down. And I'll go ahead and start cutting. There's one. All right. So now I'm going to take these strips back to the ironing board and just iron them again, focusing on the fold there in the middle, and then I'll show you how I connect these. All right, so I have my strips all pressed, and one thing I wanted to point out, if you happen to be using an ombre fabric, this is nice because both ends are dark, and so when I connect them, it's not going to be like this high contrasting transition where it goes dark to really light all of a sudden. If you are using an ombre fabric and you have a very dark and very light end, I would match the dark ends together and the light ends together when connecting these. So just something to keep in mind, but mine are dark on both ends, so it'll just keep flowing one strip to the next. So when we're connecting these, it's going to be right sides together. You're going to put them at a right angle. So I'll show you up close now on the sewing machine how I stitch these together. Alright, so I've got my two pieces right sides together, and I'm kind of making an upside down capital L here, or I have a right angle. So I want to stitch a diagonal line, and if you're trying to figure out do I do it this way or this way, you've got to think about when you fold it open. So if I stitch from the bottom left to the top right, there's going to be a line here, and when I fold it open, it's going to look like this, which won't work. So if I go from the upper left to the bottom right, and there's a line here, and I fold it over, it will look like this, and that will work. So I just want to make sure with the way mine is oriented that I go from the upper left to the bottom right. I'm using regular, just white 50 weight thread, just my regular thread that I quilt with, 95% of the time. This part's not going to show. You might just stay away from perhaps a really dark thread with a light fabric, like a black thread with white fabric maybe might show through. So for this, to figure out where the line starts, I just kind of keep an eye on the bottom fabric, maybe hold it with my finger so I know where it is, and get that right under the needle, so it's all lined up and ready to hit. And then I just swing the bottom to my tape here, so I know to just keep this bottom corner aligned with my tape as I send it through. And just like I've shown with the stitch and flip method in other videos, you might just stitch just a slight bit. The way I'm aligned here, I'm stitching just a little to the right of the line, so when I fold it over, it folds all the way over and aligns with the edges. Okay, so I'm just going to get my next one and attach. Now this L is going a different way, so again I just want to think through where how I'm going to stitch this, because this isn't on the top now like the last one was. So this time I'm going to start in the upper right and head to the left, because I know it'll fold over like this and be good. So again, I'm just going to stick that part under, and that one I can see where it touches the fabric. So this time I need to swivel and just look underneath, line up the bottom piece to my tape, and then cover it and make sure all the edges are aligned, and just kind of hold a finger there to help guide it. Alright, so I'm going to keep this one wrong side up so I don't get any twists in my fabric, and I'll just take my next piece and put it right sides together. So this will be just like the one I sent through, so I know I can just sew it the exact same way, starting with the upper right corner. Again, I'm just finding that bottom piece, aligning it with the needle, then putting the top piece down so it's right there, and aligning the bottom point on a diagonal on my tape. Again, just stitch slightly to the right of that diagonal. Okay, so now this one is right side up. I'm just going to keep it facing right side up. And wrong sides together. I want to check all of these because sometimes the bottom piece, you don't see it moves a little bit and it goes out of alignment. Like this first one, I can see that it's sewn correctly where it's going to be a continuous piece, but I can also see a gap right here. And so if I turn it over, I can see that my bottom piece moved a bit, and so that one isn't even. So I need to go back and fix that because, again, it's easier to fix now than before you start sewing everything together. But I can pull that one apart and that looks nice. Just keep moving up the strip here, looking at that one. And that looks nice. It's all one continuous piece. So that's really what I'm checking for on all of these, making sure that they were sewn in the right orientation and that it looks like one continuous strip. So maybe it's, I don't know, I have another one here to check. The first one here. Yeah, and that one looks fine too. So I just need to fix that first one and then I will show you the next step. So I'm just gonna get my seam ripper and redo that one. All right, I just fixed that one piece there, and so now I'm going to cut these apart, just the little threads in between. And then we're gonna get it on the ironing board. And then we're gonna cut the excess off and leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that should be all of them there. So I'm gonna get my fabric scissors. And again, this is a good time just to double check that you didn't miss any of your, checking any of your pieces that they align all right. But we're gonna go ahead and cut a 1/4 inch away from the thread, just leaving a 1/4 inch seam there. Okay, and we'll do that for all of these. So we're going to take these strips and fold them in half lengthwise so the wrong sides are touching, and we're just going to press all the way down and just again trying to double check as you go little by little, make sure that the bottom side is aligned, the edges are aligned. So we want the one side to be open and then the other is a fold. And then I just scoot it down as I go. Again, I'm just pressing in half. And I'll show you what I do once I start getting a long piece, because I don't want it to start wadding up on one end and undo all the pressing that I just did. So I just have the end that I pressed is starting to hang over the ironing board now. When I get to my seam here, I'm just going to hold it in a flat because I don't want the seams to open up. I'm just gonna try and keep them flat, folded together there. And press. And this is a good time to talk about why I use the diagonal seam here instead of a horizontal one that would connect up and down. A couple reasons really. One, if you have binding that maybe has pictures of recognizable objects, like maybe flowers or there's an animal or something in it, it's more of a transition where you have it's starting to taper off, so it might not harshly cut it off so much as opposed to a vertical seam. And then the biggest reason is to reduce bulk. So if you had a vertical seam, you would essentially have 4 pieces of fabric, because you have one on each side here plus the top, 4 pieces of fabric all in one place, and that's also going to have the top and the backing and the batting all in there too, so that gets really thick. But if you do a diagonal seam, it kind of redistributes the bulk so it's not all in one space. So that's why a diagonal seam is better. I know it's not as easy as just doing the horizontal lines. It takes a little extra time and maybe a little more thought, being careful to sew the diagonal the right direction, but it'll really look nice when it's all bound. So the other thing I want to talk about is once you start getting a lot of binding hanging off the edge, you don't want it dragging all over the floor and the ironing coming undone, as I start to gather it, I know they make fancy binding winders and everything. I just use clean toilet paper rolls, and so just save a couple of them, and as soon as I start to get a lot of binding pressed, I just start wrapping it around, and I'll work my way across eventually so it doesn't get too bulky in one spot, and just make sure that those edges stay aligned. And then when I get close to the part that I haven't ironed, I'll stop and just set that down and continue pressing. And then when I get a lot happening again, I'll just continue winding it around the roll. And I save these, I can show you. I always have a little bit of extra binding left, and so I just attach them, connect them to existing toilet paper rolls with my other binding. So maybe if I make a little wall quilt or something smaller, or maybe one day I'll connect these and have more of a scrappy binding, I just keep those wrapped in here with my zippers and save any excess. But I'm going to go ahead and keep pressing until the whole thing is pressed in half lengthwise.